I was there and I disappeared. Welcome back to What Do You Think? I'm your host, Valerie Smart. My host, Edward Escobar, is joining me. We're talking about Uber and Lyft and the nonsense, okay? Just straight nonsense. I was a driver myself, and I mentioned that in part one. This is part two of all of this nonsense. And we have Michael that wanted to ask a question that was discussed by Edward in part one. So go ahead, Michael.
Well, I really love the information about the sedentary death syndrome and basically how we're sitting too much. And we're driving, we're sitting, we're working, we're sitting, we're at the computer, we're sitting,
I'm
we're
sitting.
watching TV, we're sitting, and the effects of what it does to us. I think you mentioned off air is it's one of the leading causes of death.
Second leading cause of death. Yeah, exactly. And
I
it's
didn't know that.
just it's basically like I was talking about gateways. It's a gateway to a host of other problems. And people, it's a core problem that people can address. They could take care of being more mobile, like you had mentioned earlier about breathing, even proper nutrition, because by sitting too much, a lot of the garbage and the toxicity gets trapped in your system. It kind of stops right there. That's why a lot of folks, as soon as they get out of the vehicle, then they have to go to the restroom
Right.
because all of that is just kind of dropped and gotten stuck right there. As soon as you get up and start moving around, then your body starts moving things from your GI tract and says, hey, you know what? We need to exit here because there's too much toxic waste. And so a lot of these drivers, they're not doing that. I mean, I know myself when I've driven so much that you get out of the vehicle and it seems like you've been riding a horse all day and your legs are all frozen up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the circulation is just like it's numb,
Yep.
and it
Yeah.
just all of this adds up. You can't continue to abuse your body that way. There is payback, and there are consequences that are long term in effect for your health and mental health as well, mental emotional health because it gets impacted.
I'd like to
Well, and
give a shout out to a friend of mine who was a driver. I'm assuming he's still a driver. I haven't spoken to him in a while, but his experience was very, very sad in that because he sat for so long, he had gastrointestinal issues and he could not even have a BM, a bowel movement. So because of the sitting, it backed up and it backed up to the point where he couldn't have one. So they had to go in and do surgery. And then he basically ended up having to have a bowel movement into a bag. And so as he's driving with still riders in the car,
right.
he is pooping in a bag. Okay. And I was on the phone with him, I remember one night, and we were both tired, both had driven many, many hours. And he was doing something and his bag bursted when he was on his way to pick up a rider. And I'm sure there's a lot of horror stories out there, but that's a bad one because you're talking about having poop all over your car. And
Right.
he couldn't take any more rides, obviously, for the rest of the night. Uh, that
But
was his
let me
situation.
say that's poop over his own car. And so, you know what? If it's your own stuff, is different. Let's talk about the poop and pee and vomit from the writers, from other people that
Yeah,
are strangers to you. And in a hospital, that's considered a biohazard.
yeah.
That is a biohazard. And yet, Uber and Lyft corporate treat it like so nonchalantly. Oh, yeah, just clean it up. Just clean it up. Oh, take it, get professionally clean. You know what? That stuff penetrates. That stuff can have, bile in it. It
Very
has
toxic.
blood in it. It has all kinds of things that can pass a host of diseases, viruses, and everything.
Yeah.
And people, they think it's, you know what? I'm going to get a cleaning fee. Well, even the cleaning fees that they used to give, like of around $250, now it's been reduced greatly to like in some cases under $100.
I thought it was
And
like, is
that's
it
what
$15 now?
I mean, they've dropped it down. It just depends on what part of the country you're working.
Okay.
But it's dropped so significantly that they are no longer making it, a negative consequence and so damaging and hurtful to the riders that they're like, so what if I throw up in the car? So what if I piss or poop or whatever? The cleaning fee, it's not as big of a deal. So as you lower the pain threshold for the riders in terms of financial pain, then they keep doing these egregious violations and worse and worse. It's worse than a child because they're like, you know what? They made a mess. Someone else will clean it up.
Exactly.
And they're, some of these folks, they honestly should be wearing diapers in some cases over their heads too, because they're
in both places,
both
the head and their ass.
Because because they're over any orifice because they're throwing up.
Well, yeah,
basically
because they're intoxicated. They come from the club. You're picking them up. They get in your car, the motion of the car, and then all of a sudden they vomit. I have spoken to another driver where the girl pissed in his car. And so, like you said, there are toxins in that. Who is cleaning that up? Obviously, the driver, right? And Uber and Lyft are not even paying nowhere near enough to get the contaminants out of the vehicle that you have to put somebody else in. That could potentially get sick, and then whose shoulder does that fall on? Who's responsible for that in that case?
Because there's transference. I mean, even in the hospitals, these people that are working as nurses and medical that attend to people in the rooms, there's transference of diseases, just by contact, just like that, and it's some of it's
by
airborne,
air.
some of it's air.
Yeah,
it's airborne. Yeah, airborne. Yeah. So there's a host of harmful situations, as you could see cumulatively, that the driver is exposed to, but they don't know what they're getting into. They think, oh, you know what, that's fun. You get behind the wheel, you go drive. Remember the whole Lyft thing, how they used to promote, it's fun driving people around. I remember I had one guy ask me, so you do this for fun? I said, do you go to work for fun? I said, I can't cash a check at the Bank of Fun. I can't pay my mortgage with, hey, this is paid, from the fun bank. Come on, people.
You do this for fun.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And, you
I'm
sit
that
on your
bored.
backside.
I'm that bored that I'm just going to be driving all over the place and dealing with your stank attitude for fun. Yeah. Okay.
And also too, hemorrhoids too. That's another thing that's real. People deal with that.
Yeah. Hemorrhoids.
Sit too long, and all kinds of issues come from that too.
Mm-hmm.
So, people
and they don't have the health insurance to go to the doctors to get the stuff they need to cure the hemorrhoids. So then what?
Yeah. Then what? It gets worse, and basically it's the driver's problem. Driver, you handle it. Your problem, not ours. And like any situation that they have, I was speaking to another driver who was discussing the reason why, one of the primary reasons they want to have panic buttons too, that they started to implement it, is because they wanted the information to come to them first.
Mm-hmm.
And if it goes to the corporate office, Uber, Lyft, they could do damage control.
Yeah.
And they could reduce the chances of lawsuits and things, and they could basically mitigate the circumstances to their favor so that there's not the blowback as much as there would be otherwise, because then they would bring in law enforcement right away. Right. And then, it would be out of Uber and Lyft corporate's hands. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I
do.
So
it's something that can be beneficial, but hey, all you have to do is save the icon for the 911 number onto your device,
your phone, whatever.
Yeah, onto your device, right there on the front of your page of your device, so it's accessible at any time.
Right.
As an icon, you just tap it, and boom, it's going to call 911. You don't really need a magic panic button that's going to go to Uber Lyft, because all they're going to do is use it for their own benefit, and it's to the detriment of both the driver and the rider, for that sake.
You know what, Edward, you made me think about something. And although I said we were coming back from the break and we were going to talk about what we want to see changed, and we've been talking about that all along the program, but you made me think of something else that was brought up to me that I've always thought about, which is this tracking issue. So now I know when I first started with Uber and Lyft, it was this, or Uber, there was the black and white, right? Uber, I guess, sticker that you would put on your car. Right. Then it changed. And I remember not wanting to use that circular Uber sticker because I felt like it was some sort of tracking uh,
Like
device
big,
in a way. So
like Big Brother.
did
Big
you hear
Brother.
about that?
Yeah. Well, of course, it has all the electronic connectivity that is for tracking purposes, and that's Big Brother. Yeah, so a lot of folks that are not aware of it, but this is a deal. Most folks will surrender their rights to privacy for comfort and convenience, and
Hmm.
that's how they sell it. And people, they eat it up, hook, line, and sinker. That's how they take it. So yeah, that's problematic, and people need to be aware. As drivers, how about the biometrics, where we have to take a photo in order for the app to function?
Right. Right.
So and that's a requirement in order to get back on
On the
track
app.
to continue driving. So
Right.
they force you into the biometrics of that. But let's look at the other side of the fence. Do they have any requirements so that we know who these riders are?
No.
They use fake identifications,
Right.
and in some cases, in some places, like when we met with drivers in Panama City, Panama, we had drivers that over there they're using cash in some cases. So
Oh, is
anyone
that
could
so?
create a bogus account as a rider, and then from there they lure the drivers into these areas unsuspecting.
Hmm.
And then what happens? They can rape them, they can kill them, they could rob them. All of these things can happen. And Uber and Lyft, they just like, hey, your problem, not ours. You're an
Well, wasn't
independent
there that
contractor.
one?
Deal
I
with it.
know when I was in San Francisco, one driver had disappeared. He was in a picked up someone and then he was gone for months. I don't know if you remember that. He
Yeah.
just basically disappeared. And I don't even know what happened with that story. If they ever found him, what became of him. I know
In
his
New York,
family
the
was
same.
worried. Whatever happened to the guy?
Yeah, it's happened in major cities,
Hmm.
Chicago, New York, where folks have been victimized. I don't know if you remember, there was one guy who was macheted by a young passenger who was underage to begin with. And that's another thing.
Oh,
We're
I
not supposed to
remember that.
transport
Yes.
underage, underage folks, but yet Uber and Lyft are sending them our way, and they're still making money. They stay still quiet on that, but they're like, hey, you know what? You should know better. But then when you try to apply the policies and procedures that are required and deny them the ride, then it comes back on the driver, and the driver gets falsely accused and gets deactivated.
Hmm.
So even when you're trying to do your job according to the policies and procedures, the standard operating procedures, you're still thrown under the bus, and it's really horrendous, and it's something that they've been doing, violating workers' rights. This is beyond just drivers' rights; these are workers' rights, and at
Just
the
in
same
general.
time,
Just in general.
they're collecting money. They're
Right.
collecting billions of dollars, at the cost of human suffering. Is it worth it, society? No, it's not. It's not. The Uber and Lyft is not a magic bullet solution to the challenges that public infrastructure, needs are facing. It's not a magic bullet solution. Sometimes the quick and easy comes at a very high cost.
Right.
And this is the high cost of low prices. And this is only temporary, because you had said prior about these low costs that undercutting the buses and trains and so on and
Yes.
so forth.
Yes.
It's cheaper to take
Yeah.
an
They were
Uber or Lyft.
talking about it.
Well,
It
these
was written up
corporations
about.
corporations are subs the corporations are subsidizing this. So what's happening when they're subsidizing this? It's artificially at a below market rate. So the taxi cabs, they can't compete with that.
No, they cannot.
And buses and trains, they can't compete with that. But then when they have to charge the rider the true cost of giving that ride, when they release their IPO, they're going to be more financially accountable. And
I
and,
hope
and
so.
that's
I hope
when
so.
that's when that's when the shit's going to hit the fan. When they have to actually charge the rider the real cost of that ride. That's when it is. Right now, this is like a pyramid Ponzi scheme, house of cards waiting to tumble, and all they're doing is just onboarding plenty of riders and drivers and completing rides that are in many cases at a loss. So it's basically, they're losing money right now to make more money later and release their IPO and please their billion-dollar venture capitalist investors. And so they're creating this like junk bond, if you will, and then releasing this IPO, to turn this junk bond magically into real money.
Right.
And that's how they'll do it. And
So,
and and the guys that are at top of the corporate ladder, they're going to make a killing.
oh, absolutely.
meantime,
They know this, and people admire their business practice strategies and how they were able to multiply and make all of this money on the back of poor individuals. Edward, if there was one thing, so let's just say you're in front of some of the Uber execs and they're asking drivers, if we could change one thing right now to help you guys as the people who are making us our money, the people who our business relies on, this is how we even are who we are today. What would that one thing be, in your opinion?
it would be to change that misclassification of employment. And that means to call us independent contractors, but to pay us and treat us legally what it means to be an independent contractor, a real independent contractor in this country.
Okay.
We need to be setting our own rates. There was an app before, a sidecar app, that did it beautifully, and it was between the rider and the driver. And there was an agreement that was made between the rider and driver. They wanted to pay so much, the driver accepted so much, to do their job, and they were happy. They knew what they were getting into ahead of time, and everyone was happy with the deal. Not this backdoor stuff where they're basically, baiting and switching folks, which, they're promising one thing and then they're delivering something else, which in many cases is very disgusting, and it's a disservice, to the honor, and dishonors these drivers who are trying to make a living. So I would say, if they call us independent contractors, then pay us like independent contractors and treat us legally like independent contractors across the board. And that means stop threatening us for deactivation, stop using fear and intimidation, because they've turned fear and intimidation into terror and intimidation.
Right.
Because a lot of these drivers are getting like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from constantly being under Uber and Lyft's thumb. You may be deactivated. And then the false deactivation accusations that they get, and then they're deactivated. I mean, from riders who want free rides, free credits for rides. I mean, that's unheard of, and there's no consequences for the riders later.
There's absolutely no consequence. And so, Edward, what do you have coming up that, we should be looking out for in regards to this movement?
Well, we're pushing back against the IPO releases of Lyft and Uber. They are very vulnerable in the media. So we're going to be letting the media know that the SEC should not be honoring or giving them the ability to release their IPO, because the basis for their business is built on misclassification of employment, which is illegal. Okay. That is illegal, and they've known that they've done that because they've been using that illegal approach for them to blow out their transportation infrastructure worldwide. Okay. And we have to stop that.
Okay. So you're going to be doing a protest. You're going to be paying very detailed attention to how that goes and informing us what happens.
That's correct.
And taking
we'll be having manifestations, demonstrations, workers' actions to let the world know that this must stop. And there's a better way. There's better ways that this could be done, and it doesn't have to be done this way. So together we can, and that's why it's Drivers Unite, but it's also Gig Workers Unite, Rideshare Unite, Riders Unite. We all just need to unite together, against corporate greed and the abuses that corporations are doing against society.
And so how can someone get in touch with you? Do you have an email address that you can give out?
Yes, they can. driversunite.org@gmail.com. driversunite.org@gmail.com. It's all together. Or they could go to gigsup.org and sign up with us there. Check hashtag Drivers Unite. We have plenty of groups on Facebook, and throughout. We're adding on many other social media platforms as well. So look for us. We're on WhatsApp. That's our whole thing, is about getting the communication connections going with all the folks in the trenches, as well as the riders, because they need to have a voice, and we need to stand together as customers of these apps. For the future of work, we need to do this together.
Well, Edward, thank you so much. You have given a wealth of information, just so much knowledge to individuals that need to understand this gig economy more, and what it is that people who are actually doing the job face, because there's definitely that disconnect. So thank you for joining me on What Do You Think? And you'll definitely be back, because I'm sure this is not going to end. There's more to come on this topic. So thank you so much, Edward Escobar.
Thanks for having me.
And my name is Valary Smart. Thank you for joining me on What Do You Think? Right here on vibrationfrequency.com. Download the frequency and feel the vibe. I got that right this time. Take care.